Next Gen Group presents Our Story of Transition with your hosts, Becky and Christine Hopko.
Hi, welcome to our story of transition. I'm Becky,
And I'm Christine.
and thank you for coming and visiting us again. We are going on to part 2 of the cross-dressing years. Where we were at was our big drag-out fight of Thanksgiving, um, 2000 something. Yeah, somewhere around there. Kind of like Adam Goldberg. You watched Goldberg, It was January. It was November, Thanksgiving of 2000 and
Right.
something. um, so, but what we had done at that is that Christine, who at the time was Jennifer. Let's talk about your
Mhm.
your your generations, your 2.0
Right.
type of thing. So Christine came out and said that she had to be a crossdresser,
Right.
not transgender.
Yeah, I at least put the line down on that. So I knew that at this point we had kind of a habit of moving quite frequently. So every year we were living in apartments. When the lease would come due, we'd find another lease somewhere else that we wanted to be, and that was more attractive. So we would move very often. So, but during these moves, you would always ask me as we were packing our things, "Oh, that those are Jennifer's items. Do you really need those?"
Right.
Right? So, and I would be or begrudgingly, I would always say, "Oh, I guess not," and I'd end up purging. So,
Well, and you would purge on your own once in a while too. You would get
well,
frustrated.
yeah, sometimes, but that was much more rare than if you like confronted me like that.
Right.
So, you kind of, in a way, I felt like you were guilting me into getting rid of my things. So,
Mhm.
but of course, I would just, we'd make the move, we'd settle in our new place, and I'd go right back out and start buying things again. So it didn't matter. So, you know,
Yeah. So I started looking into research. Cross-dressing is even more challenging to find information on, which is another reason why we're covering this because definitely at this point in my life, there was no way in hell I was telling anybody that my husband was a cross-dresser.
right. I mean, that was
And
like extremely taboo, extremely,
yeah, I
very
mean,
out there.
and I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what that meant to me. There's a
Mhm.
lot of different things. So,
Yeah, unless you lived in like San Francisco or New York City, perhaps,
right.
you know,
So,
there
and
wasn't much of a community for that. At
well,
least we weren't aware of
exactly.
any communities.
So I challenged her, um, he, to go out and find
Right.
some of those things. Because at the time he told me he wanted to cross dress, go out and socialize, and create some friends.
Right. So I started pushing her to make this more mainstream within our lives. So I was trying to get her more involved.
Yep. So we went out on date nights. Um, Again, we had two young kids still at home, so it's not like he could dress all the time.
Right.
And so special occasions to go out, and sometimes that was date night, which was a little odd for me. But due to finances, opportunity, babysitting, all the things of a family life of doing something around that, we went out and it was just you and I for a very long time,
Well, I don't know what a
probably
very
about
long
4
time was,
years,
but yeah, maybe.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and I mean, we were even doing that through fetish type events because, of course, I couldn't find anything that was
That's the only thing
anything
that was
other
said there.
than
Yeah.
that. So, we just we would go to, these fetish type events where I knew basically it would be okay for me to
A
dress that
safe
way,
a
right?
safe
So a
space.
safe space for me. So, but all the while, I was still very much centered around myself when it came to who I was. As you mentioned, I'd taken on the name Jennifer at the time.
Mhm.
So, um, that was a very, again, personal thing for me. So I hadn't admitted to myself yet that, you know, what this was to me or what was going on or, um, what that meant. So basically for many of those years, it was just a personal struggle for me to understand what it was that I wanted out of this and to try to involve you in this conversation. But that, of course, took different paths because of my exposure to pornography and things of that sort. It ended up being, again, more of a fetish thing for me. And without realizing it, my behavior actually was changing a lot. I mean, so because since I knew you weren't that interested in my cross dressing, I went, of course, to trying to find other people who would, be more like
Welcoming.
welcoming, right, of my cross dressing and Jennifer in particular. So, as you mentioned, that led to some cheating because, I tried to involve other women who might have been more,
Right.
um,
And that wasn't just physical
right,
cheating, that was online cheating, which that was a whole whole 'nother conversation that we never agreed on at the time. Didn't feel like it was training cheating. Hindsight, I'd like to see what you think about that.
well, no, of course it was because I was trying to, again, find somebody who was more, accepting of that. So, so that's, you know, definitely a type of cheating, right? So even though in those cases I wasn't going to physically meet some of these people, but I still was trying to find people within, where we lived at the time. So as well. So, but that was all just out of my need to want to be accepted as Jennifer and to be out there as this person. And that's when I started developing this personality of mine. So I started acting a lot more differently around you, right?
Mhm. Most definitely. I mean, there was still a lot of depression. Never really got over that. There was a lot of anger. Um, Still a lot of fetish as well,
Right.
and um, sexual desire around it
Right.
too is all that I was observing,
Right. And
and what you were communicating to me.
right. Well, and that's what I had observed on the internet because the one thing that I seemed to find a lot of was this forced feminization thing. So, the fantasy of any cross-dressing person, at least for males to females, is always that you find this person who wants to force you to become a woman,
Right.
right? So,
And at this point, you were still doing the pornography thing
right.
on top of it,
Hmm.
the addiction. So I couldn't tell which was what.
Right. So I started down my own rabbit hole with a lot of that. And of course, pornography, there's a whole bunch of different issues associated with that addiction in itself. Because, with any addiction, it's a thief of your time. It steals away your family life, your life with your spouse, because now you're not spending that energy trying to promote your relationship, so to say, right?
Yeah,
Instead, you are putting that energy into finding more and more thrills,
right, and
right?
during this time, I felt like, um, it came to a head at a later time, but I felt like, to a certain extent, he was cheating on another woman with himself because he
Right,
wanted to spend so much time
right. And that came to a
with that.
head at one type in an argument where, you told me essentially that you thought that that was cheating,
Mhm,
right? So, and then that got me very angry and upset because, now you were trying to really, at least in my mind, dig into this person that was who in many realities was who I really was as a person, was a woman.
right.
So, there was a lot of resentment that created
And I was
between
having
me and
resentment
you.
on my own side that
Right,
I mean, when we got married, I was the center of his world,
right,
and he was the center of my world. And at some point that moved where that it was just all about him. I didn't feel like I was the center of anybody's world except for my own whirlwind
right,
world. Um, and that even though in many cases I was married and had a partner, I wasn't married and had a partner and was a single parent.
right.
I just physically had somebody there, but I didn't emotionally or intimately have someone there.
Right,
So, on hindsight, because what I'm gonna say is a lot of this is a hindsight piece, on her part, but during that time, there was no way we could have had any of these conversations or believed anything I said.
right. And it was just because we had put up so many walls between ourselves because the communication between us had gotten so poor that, everything just about was an argument,
Right.
right? So, I mean, it was really affecting our relationship severely,
Well, we
at that
didn't have a
time.
relationship at that time, really.
Right,
We were roommates more than anything.
right.
So, um, but I'm curious to know if you look back now, what would you tell somebody who might be in that particular stage right now? What would you tell them that they need to know?
Well, basically, the cross-dressing years are the most difficult years of all, um, because that's where you really need to find out what this whole thing means to you. I have a good friend of mine, and I'll do a shout out to Savannah Hauk. She is a true non-binary person where she can be a cross-dresser for life and not has no desire to transition to become a woman.
Right. And it's not the
So,
fetish piece of
right.
it either.
So, she just enjoys the having the freedom of a dual personality.
Right.
So, which is sometimes a little bit different than someone like me who discovers that you have been living a life that wasn't yours,
Right.
so to say.
So what would you tell somebody who's in a relationship
Mhm.
about cross-dressing, whether or not they understood that they are transgender or not?
Well, the one thing you need to do is do some research about it. Find out what it really means to you. What is your real reason for doing it? And it may not be what you think. So, you while you may be attracted to a lot of the fetishism, a lot of the sexual aspect of it, there is that whole aspect where it could just be that you have a non-binary personality,
Right.
just like my friend Savannah Hauk does. So, or you could really truly be a transgender person. Well, not to say that cross dressers are not transgender, because I do believe that they are.
Right.
Because
Which is another
anyone,
conversation too,
right?
another episode.
But I use the word transgender in this context to mean somebody who finds a need to,
Full time.
well, yeah, but finds a need to transition
Right.
their life from the gender that they were assigned at birth to the gender that they really are.
Right. So in my research, of course, a lot of people know about drag queens. Some people know about drag kings. There's not as much hype around drag kings, but those are not cross dressers because they are for entertainment purposes. Um, but a cross dresser is part of the LGBTQ community. You'll hear me reference it. A colleague of mine calls it the rainbow community. That's easier. I'm getting old. I can't remember like acronyms. Um, but the other thing is that what one person's definition is not another person's definition, even though it's the same definition.
Right,
And it's kind of ironic that we all want to be labeled something, but we none of us want
right.
labels.
But probably the best show to understand maybe what we're talking about right now to look at is the show Pose, because that covers a lot of that spectrum.
Yeah,
Because on that show there are drag queens and there are transgender women, as well as a little bit of everything in between.
right. It's the whole
So,
rainbow community of a
right,
sort. But that's on Netflix. That's something. A couple other. A lot of my research was shows too. And actually, that's how we communicated a lot.
right,
Was that these shows would be expressing something, and so that's how our communication came back. But communication is the key here,
right.
and I you can
So,
definitely correct me if you feel
mhm,
I'm wrong. I feel like that those who are cross-dressing or transgender have the ability and have an upper hand to somebody who is their loved one.
well, what do you mean exactly by that?
In the regards of your feelings trump my feelings
Okay.
in the society, that we should be just giving you all the support in the world and going, yes, but we're not allowed to have our feelings.
Well, that depends upon what part of society you're talking about because
But that's kind of a generality of society, that I have found even within my group. So at this point, when we were cross dressing, I was very, very, very alone
okay.
in this. The only person I could talk to was you, who we fought about.
Mhm.
So I did research. I actually reached out, ironically, Savannah Hawk, who she mentioned, um, she saw on her Facebook feed a book, Living with a Crossdresser,
Right,
that
which is
she wrote.
Savannah's book.
And so we ordered it and I read it, and it was somebody who had somewhat of my perspective too. It wasn't just about the one who did it.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me that question. What would I recommend to someone who's cross-dressing to come out to their partner, especially, is introduce that life to your partner through things like the books and the shows.
And even
Don't
shows like
Yeah,
this.
don't just come out and tell them, "Hey, I like to dress in women's clothes," and especially don't dress yourself up and tell your significant other that you're making them a special dinner and have
Right.
them come home from
No,
work with you
no,
dressed as a woman. Yeah, no, that doesn't work.
it doesn't work.
That's the
Now,
fantasy of the forced feminization, and I can tell you that's definitely not going to impress your spouse for
no,
sure.
and the other thing that you're gonna want to know is that that person needs time. No matter how small increments, small changes, they have to figure things out for themselves as well, and it's not always your timeline, and it's not always our timeline, so that's where the compromise
Right. Well, and that's
comes into
why
play.
I suggest that you try to introduce this lifestyle to your significant other or partner or spouse, whatever that may be, through books, through media, because there's so much of it out there now that you can get a it's basically just education.
Yeah,
Educate each other on what this whole thing is and what it means to both of you and have that conversation.
and be
And you can
open to that conversation.
right, and you can do that without having to per se come outright to your
Right.
partner, your spouse, your significant other. So have those conversations of, "Hey, I've seen this show. Why don't you watch it with me?" Or, "Hey, I've got this book that I read about cross-dressing, whatever." You
Watch the
know,
shows together, Transparent,
yeah, that's
that's the
another
type of thing on
good one.
Amazon. Um, Now it is drama,
Right,
and the drama can be scary for us, the cis partner, as well,
right,
because that's where we're at. And to just give those out there, the cis partners world is getting totally uprooted. Everything she or he knew about you.
right. Whereas the cross-dressing person or the transgender person, right? Um, they're just expanding their world. So they're trying to expand it, whereas the your partner, your spouse, your significant other may see that as a total collapsing, right? Of
Exactly.
the relationship and the social life that you have, right?
Right. So we get very emotional, and we make some rash decisions, just as you guys as guys, not girls, guys,
Right,
guys, um, as you guys make a, a decision. And I guess the other thing is that stereotypical. None of us are a stereotype. So just because you become a woman in transition doesn't mean that you have to be hypersensitive and drama and everything you see on reality TV.
right,
That's not real. That's not real. And
right,
there's a lot of women who do that, and that's not real.
right.
So,
But
but you really need to understand that your cis partner is struggling. Even if they say they're okay with it, they are still struggling. Okay,
right. Well, that's I'm okay as woman speak for I'm not okay anyway. So,
fine.
right, exactly.
No, you hear fine. It's not fine. So, so I think, obviously we will talk about this multiple times, multiple things as you hear our stories. And I don't know if you noticed or not. Sometimes when Christine tells a story or I tell a story, one of us hasn't heard that part of the story yet, even though we've had lots of conversations.
Right, because it's just things that come up, and I mean, and that's why we are doing these recordings is because we want to have the most authentic type of conversation. So, we're not doing any of this with a script per se.
No.
We may choose a topic that we're going to talk about for these recordings, but we just speak whatever comes up,
Yeah, and this is all recorded live, so you hear family in the background. You may hear cats and kids and other
especially cats.
distractions. Cats love to come in while we're doing stuff. So if you
Yep.
hear extra noises, please excuse them.
Yep. But
We are just a family.
right. And just remember, so if you are a transgender person, so if you are cross dressing, if you have feelings that you are in the wrong body, whatever that looks like to you, however that feels like to you, just remember to consider what it is that your partner is also going to have to go through. So, don't put up a wall. have some genuine conversation about it, and you don't have to make it about yourself. So, the best way to start any of these types of conversations, again, is just to make the comparison to someone else. It's kind
Yeah.
of like that conversation you have where it's like, "Hey, I've got a friend who
Yeah.
wants to
Yeah.
know about,"
Hey, I
right?
just
Even
heard
though it's
about this
really you.
podcast, Our Story of Transition.
Right.
Have
Hey,
you
yeah,
heard
there
it
you go.
yet? Those types of things. You don't have to be like coming straight out. That's shell shock
Yep.
in many cases. And I've
And
even heard of some
mhm,
partners who knew way before the person even knew.
right,
So that's the other thing is just because somebody says they're not doesn't mean that they're not. They just have not accepted it for
right.
themselves.
And you don't really need to confront them either as their spouse, partner, or significant other. Don't push them because, they'll be ready when they're ready to talk about it. And especially if they have lived a longer life of being the way that they, if
Right.
they're gotten used to being someone who they're not, it's going to take time. It's going to take a lot of time. And
And
don't make assumptions about each other off the bat, right?
right. And with that thought, that's how the cis is too.
Right.
Okay. We grew together. We were married 20 years.
Mm,
We were married 10 years before the cross-dressing thing became a thing. Then we were married another 10 years on top of that
right.
before the transgender years, I
Right.
guess we'd call.
Mhm.
So um, we've known each other for a long time, and that's also our society that we grew up in too of
Right.
generations. So different generations have different aspects and thought patterns on this. So um, this will not be the last time we talk about this. Um, we will rehash this because we also just have thoughts. We used to just sit down and talk about this, and I was like, we just need to start podcasting or
Right.
and sharing this because it just needs to be said. Hopefully, it just creates conversations in your home and helps people feel like they're not alone and they're not crazy and that
Yeah,
they're
from either end, right?
from either end.
Mhm.
They're not in an abusive relationship because somebody's being more selfish than the other, things of that nature. So we're going to wrap up this one. This one went a little long, but I hope you enjoyed it. Again, looking forward to comments, questions. Go to ourstoryofTransition.com. You can find our podcast on all the major pieces. And please share with somebody you think that might benefit from this.
Yep, and we'd love to hear from you, so please go to ourstoryofTransition.com, go to our contact us page, and leave us a message. So we'd
Yep.
love to hear from you.
And please check out our blog too. We do blog posts about various things as well. Thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for joining us at Our Story of Transition. Find us at ourstoryofTransition.com. Brought to you by the Next Gen Group.